It is essential to understand that the Eternal Vigil is not a force of benevolence, nor is it a harbinger of malice. It was not created to be just, though it strives to uphold justice where it can. It was not forged to be cruel, though its methods have often been twisted into acts of chilling severity. The Eternal Vigil was built for one purpose: to endure, to stand as an unbreakable barrier against the chaos that threatens to consume the cosmos. In this, it has been terrifyingly effective. For eons, the Vigil has accumulated traditions, rituals, and customs that trail in its wake like the echoes of a timeless march. Its sentinels spend lifetimes in silent service, navigating the labyrinthine complexities of their duty. Some might argue that these traditions are superfluous, yet they grant the institution an inertia as unyielding as the laws of physics themselves. One of these ancient traditions is of particular relevance today, and it involves the Vigil's curious relationship with one of its newest members, the Klyvarians. When the Klyvarians first breached the boundaries of their isolated star system and made contact with the galaxy's most revered institution, they were introduced to this tradition. When a new species joins the ranks of the Eternal Vigil, it is customary for them to adopt an epithet that reflects their essence. These names are not mere labels, they are declarations of identity, encapsulating a species' history, evolution, and the qualities that propelled them from the mire of primal existence to the stars. The names are simple yet profound, following a basic structure. The Zephyrians, whose mastery of wind and storm allowed them to soar above their rivals, became those who ride the tempest. The Lithans, who carved their civilization from the living rock of their homeworld, took the name those who shape the stone. It is a tradition that some dismiss as foolish, yet it carries a deeper truth. A name is a promise, and a species that calls itself those who endure will fight to the last breath to uphold that promise. It is a reflection of what a species values most, what they aspire to, and what they fear losing. Critics argue that it oversimplifies, pigeonholes, or grandstands, but the tradition has persisted through countless cycles of peace and war alike. When the Klyvarians joined the Vigil, the question of their epithet dominated discussions for cycles. Their choice would reveal much about their nature, their ambitions, and their place within the galactic order. The Klyvarians, however, made their decision with startling swiftness. At their induction ceremony, their representative stood before the assembly and declared their name: those who watch. Biologically, it made sense. The Klyvarians were a species of unparalleled perception, their senses honed to detect the faintest disturbances in their environment. But the choice raised eyebrows. What kind of species defines itself by observation? What kind of promise does that make? The cycles that followed only deepened the mystery. The Klyvarians proved to be a species of unparalleled patience and foresight. Where others rushed to action, they waited. Where others sought glory, they observed. They avoided conflict whenever possible, preferring to negotiate, manipulate, or simply outlast their adversaries. This approach earned them few allies but many admirers. Who could deny the value of a species that saw what others could not? Yet their true nature remained shrouded in mystery until the day the Vorath arrived. The Vorath were a species of relentless expansion, their fleets carving a path of destruction across the galaxy. They had no interest in negotiation, no patience for diplomacy. They were those who consume, and they lived up to their name. When they turned their gaze toward the Klyvarians, many expected the Vigil's newest members to falter. The Klyvarians had no standing army, no fleet of warships. They were observers, not warriors, but the Klyvarians had been watching. When the Vorath fleet entered Klyvarian space, they found themselves ensnared in a web of traps and ambushes that had been years in the making. The Klyvarians had studied their enemies, learned their tactics, and predicted their every move. They had turned their own systems into fortresses, their planets into death traps. The Vorath, for all their might, found themselves outmaneuvered at every turn. The war was not swift, nor was it kind. The Klyvarians fought with a cold, calculated precision that unnerved even their allies. They did not seek glory or conquest, they sought survival, and in the end, they prevailed. The Vorath, humbled and broken, withdrew from Klyvarian space, their fleets in ruins. In the aftermath, the Klyvarians returned to their role as observers. They did not celebrate their victory, nor did they seek to expand their influence. They simply watched, as they always had. But the galaxy had learned a valuable lesson. How far? Klyvarians were not merely those who watch, they were those who see, and in a universe filled with chaos and uncertainty, there was no greater power than foresight. On the floor of the Eternal Vigil's Grand Assembly, the Klyvarian representatives stood once more. "We are not warriors," they said. "We are not conquerors. We are watchers. And we have seen enough." The galaxy listened, and for the first time in eons it felt a flicker of hope. The Vigil had endured, and so too would they. The Grand Assembly Hall of the Eternal Vigil, a cavernous expanse of shimmering obsidian and starlit arches, fell into a silence so profound it seemed to echo. The Klyvarian representatives' words lingered in the air, heavy with implication. Their declaration was not a boast nor a threat. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the same measured calm that had come to define their species. The representatives of countless civilizations, each bearing their own epithets and histories, exchanged glances. Some were awed, others were uneasy. All were listening. The Klyvarians had always been an enigma, even among the diverse tapestry of the Eternal Vigil. Their induction as those who watch had been met with curiosity, skepticism, and, in some corners, derision. To many, their choice of epithet had seemed passive, almost timid, but the war with the Vorath had shattered those assumptions. The Klyvarians had not merely watched, they had seen. They had foreseen the storm before the first cloud gathered, and they had prepared for it with a precision that bordered on prescience. Their victory was not one of brute force, but of insight, patience, and an unshakable understanding of their enemies. In the wake of their triumph, the Klyvarians did not seek to capitalize on their newfound reputation. They did not demand tribute, nor did they expand their territory. They simply returned to their quiet observation, their sensors and scouts once again scanning the void for signs of the next threat. But the galaxy could not forget what they had done. The Klyvarians had proven that there was strength in stillness, power in perception, and now, as their representatives stood before the assembly, their words carried a weight that could not be ignored. "We have seen the patterns," the Klyvarian continued, their voice a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through the very stones of the hall. "We have seen the cycles of rise and fall, of conquest and collapse. We have seen the Vorath, and we have seen others like them. They are not unique. They are not the first, and they will not be the last. The chaos they bring is but a symptom of a greater imbalance." The assembly stirred, a ripple of murmurs passing through the gathered representatives. The Klyvarians' words were not comforting, but they were undeniably true. The Vorath had been a devastating force, but they were not the only threat lurking in the shadows of the galaxy. The Eternal Vigil had always known this, of course. It was the reason they existed. But hearing it stated so plainly, with such certainty, was a reminder of the fragility of their order. "The Vigil endures," the Klyvarians said, their gaze sweeping across the assembly. "But endurance is not enough. To truly protect the cosmos, we must do more than stand against the chaos. We must understand it. We must anticipate it, and we must act before it is too late." The words hung in the air, a challenge and a call to action. For eons, the Eternal Vigil had been a bulwark, a steadfast guardian against the tides of destruction. But the Klyvarians were suggesting something more. Not just a shield, but a sword. Not just a barrier, but a force of preemptive action. It was a radical idea, one that went against the very foundations of the Vigil's traditions. And yet, it was difficult to deny the logic behind it. The Zephyrian representative, a towering figure wreathed in swirling currents of air, was the first to speak. "You speak of foresight," they said, their voice a low rumble like distant thunder. "But foresight is not infallible. To act on suspicion alone is to risk becoming the very chaos we seek to prevent." The Klyvarian inclined their head, acknowledging the point. "We do not advocate for rash action," they replied. "But neither can we afford to wait until the storm is upon us. The Vorath were not the first, and they will not be the last. There are others even now who gather in the shadows. We have seen them, we have watched them, and we know what they intend." A chill passed through the assembly. The Klyvarians' words were not a prediction, they were a warning, and warnings in the history of the Eternal Vigil were rarely given lightly. The Lithan representative, their body a living sculpture of stone and crystal, spoke next. "If what you say is true," they said, their voice grinding like tectonic plates, "then we must act, but we cannot do so blindly. We must have proof, we must have certainty." The Klyvarians' response was immediate. "You will have it," they said. "We have gathered the data, we have analyzed the patterns, and we are prepared to share our findings with the Assembly. But know this, the time for debate is finite. The threat we face is not a distant possibility, it is an imminent reality." The Assembly erupted into a cacophony of voices, each representative clamoring to be heard. Some demanded evidence, others called for caution. A few, emboldened by the Klyvarians' victory over the Vorath, urged immediate action. The hall, once a bastion of order and tradition, was now a maelstrom of conflicting opinions and agendas. Through it all, the Klyvarian representative stood silent, their expression unreadable. They had said what needed to be said. The rest was up to the Assembly. As the debate raged on, a single thought echoed in the minds of those present. The Eternal Vigil had endured for eons. But to face the challenges ahead, it would need to evolve. And evolution, as the Klyvarians had shown, required more than strength. It required vision. The galaxy was watching, and so too now was the Vigil. The chaos of the assembly hall gradually subsided, the cacophony of voices yielding to a tense, expectant silence. The Klyvarian representative remained at the center of the chamber, their presence a quiet anchor amidst the storm. They had ignited a fire, one that could not be easily extinguished. The question now was whether the Eternal Vigil would rise to the challenge or cling to the safety of its ancient traditions. The Zephyrian representative, their form shimmering with barely contained energy, stepped forward once more. "If the Klyvarians have seen what they claim," they said, their voice carrying the weight of authority, "then we must act. But we cannot do so as fragmented factions. The Vigil was forged to stand as one. If we are to face this new threat, we must do so united." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly. The Zephyrians, with their mastery of the Tempest, were known for their decisive nature. Their words carried a sense of urgency that resonated with many. Yet not all were convinced. The Lithan representative, their crystalline form refracting the light of the chamber, raised a hand. "Unity is essential," they said, their voice steady and deliberate. "But so is caution. The Klyvarians speak of patterns and predictions, but we must ensure that their vision is not clouded by fear or bias. We cannot risk plunging the galaxy into war based on conjecture." The Klyvarians' response was calm, measured. "We do not ask for blind faith," they said. "We ask only that you consider the evidence we have gathered. The patterns are clear, the threat undeniable, but the choice to act or not is yours." With a gesture, the Klyvarian activated a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber. Images and data streams flickered to life, painting a vivid picture of the galaxy's unseen undercurrents. There were fleets massing in the void, their movements too coordinated to be coincidental. There were whispers of alliances forming, in the shadows, of ancient technologies being unearthed and weaponized. And there at the heart of it all was a pattern, a cycle of conquest and destruction that had repeated itself countless times throughout history. The assembly watched in silence as the Klyvarians' evidence unfolded before them. The data was irrefutable, the conclusions inescapable. The galaxy was on the brink of another cataclysm, one that could dwarf even the Vorath's rampage. And yet, the question remained, what could the Eternal Vigil do to stop it? The Zephyrian representative was the first to break the silence. "We cannot wait," they said, their voice firm. "The storm is coming and we must meet it head-on. The Vigil must mobilize, not as individual species, but as a united force. We must strike before the enemy can gather its strength." The Lithan representative nodded slowly, their crystalline form glinting with reflected light. "Agreed," they said, "but we must also be strategic. The Klyvarians have shown us the value of foresight. We must use that foresight to our advantage. We must identify the enemy's weaknesses and exploit them. We must be as precise as we are powerful." The Klyvarian inclined their head in acknowledgement. "We will provide whatever assistance we can," they said. "Our sensors, our scouts, our analysts, they are at your disposal. But know this, the enemy we face is not like the Vorath. They are not driven by mindless hunger. They are cunning, patient, and ruthless. They will not make the same mistakes." The assembly fell silent once more, the weight of the Klyvarians' words settling over them like a shroud. The challenge before them was daunting, but it was not insurmountable. The Eternal Vigil had endured for eons, weathering countless storms. But this time they would need to be more than a shield. They would need to be a spear. As the representatives began to debate the specifics of their strategy, the Klyvarian stepped back, their role as catalyst complete. They had done what they could. The rest was up to the Vigil. In the days that followed, the Eternal Vigil underwent a transformation. Ancient protocols were revised, new alliances forged. The Zephyrians took the lead in mobilizing the Vigil's fleets, their mastery of the void unmatched. The Lithans focused on fortifying key systems, turning entire planets into impenetrable bastions, and the Klyvarians, ever watchful, provided the intelligence needed to guide their efforts. It was not an easy process. Old rivalries and mistrust threatened to undermine their unity at every turn. But the Klyvarians' evidence was too compelling to ignore, and the stakes were too high to falter. Slowly, reluctantly, the Eternal Vigil began to move as one. And as they did, the galaxy held its breath. The storm was coming, and the Vigil would be ready. But even as they prepared for the battles ahead, a single question lingered in the minds of all who served. What would the cost of victory be? The Klyvarians, for their part, had no answer. They could only watch, as they always had, and hope that their foresight would be enough to guide the Vigil through the darkness. For in the end, they were not warriors or conquerors, they were watchers. And in a universe filled with chaos and uncertainty, that was both their greatest strength and their greatest burden. The galaxy, vast and ancient, seemed to hold its breath as the Eternal Vigil mobilized. The once static institution, bound by centuries of tradition and ritual, now moved with a purpose that was almost alien to its nature. Fleets of warships, their hulls gleaming with the insignia of countless species, gathered at strategic points across the void. Planets were fortified, their surfaces bristling with defenses that had not been seen since the darkest days of the Vorath War. And through it all, the Klyvarians watched, their sensors and scouts feeding a constant stream of data to the Vigils, command centers. The enemy, however, remained elusive. The Klyvarians' evidence had painted a clear picture of their intentions, but their identity was still shrouded in mystery. They were not a single species, nor a unified empire. They were a coalition, a shadowy alliance of factions that had been pushed to the fringes of galactic society. Some were remnants of fallen civilizations, their pride and power long since eroded. Others were upstarts, ambitious and ruthless, seeking to carve out their place in the cosmos by any means necessary. What united them was not loyalty or ideology, but opportunity. They had seen the cracks in the Eternal Vigil's armor, and they intended to exploit them. The Vigil's first encounter with this new threat came not in a grand battle, but in a series of skirmishes on the edges of civilized space. Outposts and colonies, long thought to be secure, were attacked with a precision and coordination that left the Vigil's defenders reeling. The enemy struck quickly and vanished before reinforcements could arrive, leaving behind only destruction and confusion. It was a strategy designed to test the Vigil's resolve, to probe its weaknesses and sow doubt among its ranks. The Zephyrians, ever the warriors, advocated for a swift and decisive response. "We cannot allow them to dictate the terms of this conflict," their commander declared during a heated council meeting. "We must take the fight to them before they grow bolder." The Lithans, more cautious by nature, urged restraint. "We do not yet know the full extent of their capabilities," they countered. "To strike blindly is to risk falling into a trap. We must fortify our positions and wait for them to reveal themselves." The Klyvarians, as always, offered a different perspective. "The enemy is testing us," their representative said. "They seek to divide us, to make us question our unity. But they have made one critical mistake. They have underestimated our foresight. We have seen their patterns, and we can use them against them." The Vigil's leaders listened, their initial frustration giving way to a grudging respect for the Klyvarians' insight. It was decided that a hybrid approach would be taken. The Zephyrians would lead a series of targeted strikes against known enemy positions, while the Lithans focused on shoring up the Vigil's defenses. The Klyvarians, meanwhile, would continue to monitor the enemy's movements, using their unparalleled perception to anticipate and counter their strategies. The first major engagement came at the edge of the Zephyrian expanse, a region of space, known for its turbulent stellar winds and treacherous nebulae. A Vigil fleet, led by the Zephyrians, intercepted an enemy armada that had been raiding nearby colonies. The battle was fierce and chaotic, the Zephyrians' mastery of the void clashing against the enemy's cunning and adaptability. But the Vigil had the advantage of foresight. The Klyvarians, analyzing the enemy's movements in real time, provided the fleet with critical intelligence that allowed them to outmaneuver their opponents. The enemy was forced to retreat, their ships limping back into the shadows. It was a victory, but a costly one. The Vigil had proven that it could adapt, that it could fight back against an enemy that thrived on chaos. But the enemy was far from defeated. They had shown that they could strike anywhere at any time, and that they were willing to sacrifice much to achieve their goals. As the conflict dragged on, the Vigil began to change in ways that no one could have predicted. The rigid hierarchy that had defined it for eons began to loosen, replaced by a more fluid and collaborative structure. Species that had once been rivals found themselves working together, their strengths complementing each other, in ways that had never been possible before. The Zephyrians' aggression was tempered by the Lithans' caution, while the Klyvarians' foresight provided a guiding light in the darkness. Yet, even as the Vigil grew stronger, the cost of the war began to weigh heavily on its members. The enemy's attacks were relentless, their tactics increasingly brutal. Entire colonies were wiped out, their populations slaughtered or enslaved. The Vigil's fleets, though formidable, were stretched thin, their resources dwindling with each passing cycle. And through it all the Klyvarians watched, their silent vigil a constant reminder of the stakes. In the end, it was not strength or strategy that turned the tide, but something far more profound. The Vigil, for all its power, had always been defined by its unity. It was this unity, forged in the crucible of war, that proved to be its greatest weapon. The enemy, for all their cunning, could not overcome the bond that had been forged between the Vigil's members. They could not break the spirit of those who endure, those who shape the stone, or those who ride the tempest. And they could not outwit those who watch. The final battle came not in the void, but in the heart of the Vigil itself. The enemy, desperate and cornered, launched a daring assault on the Vigil's central command hub, hoping to decapitate the organization in one swift stroke. But the Vigil was ready. The Zephyrians met the enemy head-on, their ships cutting through the void like blades of lightning. The Lithans held the line, their fortifications unyielding, and the Klyvarians, their senses honed to a razor's edge, guided the defense with a precision that left the enemy no room to maneuver. When the dust settled, the enemy was broken. Their fleets were scattered, their leaders captured or slain. The Vigil had prevailed, but the cost had been high. The central hub, once a symbol of the Vigil's enduring strength, lay in ruins. Countless lives had been lost, and the scars of the war would linger for generations. Yet as the Vigil began the long process of rebuilding, there was a sense of hope. The galaxy had been reminded of the Vigil's purpose, of the necessity of its existence, and the Vigil itself had been reminded of its strength, not as a collection of species, but as a united force, the Klyvarian representative, standing amidst the ruins of the central hub, spoke for the first time since the battle's end. "We have endured," they said, their voice quiet but firm. "But endurance is not enough. We must learn from this. We must grow, and we must remain vigilant, for the chaos will always return." The galaxy listened, and for the first time in eons, it felt not just hope but determination. The Vigil had endured, and so too would they. The ruins of the central hub became a symbol, not of defeat but of resilience. The Eternal Vigil, though battered and scarred, emerged from the conflict with a renewed sense of purpose. The war had tested them in ways they could never have anticipated, but it had also revealed their potential. They were more than a collection of species bound by tradition. They were a living, evolving entity, capable of adapting to the ever-shifting tides of the cosmos. In the aftermath of the battle, the Vigil's leaders convened in a temporary command center, a stark contrast to the grandeur of the hallowed assembly hall. The atmosphere was somber but resolute. The Zephyrian commander, their form still crackling with residual energy from the battle, spoke first. "We have won a great victory," they said, their voice carrying the weight of both pride and sorrow. "But it is not the end. The enemy may be broken, but the chaos they represent still lingers. We must remain vigilant." The Lithan representative, their crystalline form reflecting the dim light of the chamber, nodded in agreement. "We must also rebuild," they said, "not just our fortifications but our unity. This war has shown us that we are stronger together than we are apart. We must ensure that this lesson is not forgotten." The Klyvarian representative, ever the observer, remained silent for a moment before speaking. "The enemy we faced was not the source of the chaos," they said, their voice calm but insistent. "They were a symptom. The true threat lies in the imbalances that allow such factions to rise. If we are to prevent another war, we must address these imbalances at their root." The room fell silent as the Klyvarians' words sank in. It was a daunting prospect, one that went beyond the Vigil's traditional role as a guardian, but it was also an opportunity, a chance to redefine what it meant to endure. Over the following cycles, the Eternal Vigil embarked on a new mission. They began to reach out to the marginalized and the forgotten, offering aid and support to those who had been pushed to the fringes of galactic society. They established new outposts in regions that had long been neglected, not as fortresses, but as beacons of hope. They worked to address the economic and social disparities that had fueled the rise of the enemy coalition, seeking to create a more just and equitable galaxy. The Zephyrians, with their mastery of the void, took the lead. In these efforts, their fleets becoming symbols of protection rather than conquest. The Lithans, with their skill in shaping stone and metal, helped to rebuild shattered worlds, turning ruins into thriving communities. And the Klyvarians, with their unparalleled perception, guided these efforts, ensuring that the Vigil's actions were informed by a deep understanding of the galaxy's complexities. It was not an easy task. Old prejudices and rivalries still lingered, and there were those who resisted the Vigil's new direction. But the Vigil persisted, driven by the knowledge that true endurance required more than strength. It required compassion and foresight. The cycles passed. The galaxy began to change. The scars of the war slowly healed, and a new sense of unity began to take root. The Vigil's outposts became hubs of trade and cultural exchange, places where species that had once been enemies could come together as allies. The Vigil itself became a symbol not just of protection, but of hope. Yet even as the galaxy grew stronger, the Klyvarians remained watchful. They knew that the chaos they had fought against was not gone, merely subdued. There would always be new threats, new imbalances to address, but they also knew that the Vigil and the galaxy it protected was capable of enduring. In the heart of the rebuilt central hub, now a testament to the Vigil's resilience, the Klyvarian representative stood before a new assembly. The chamber was filled with representatives from across the galaxy, their faces reflecting the diversity and unity that had become the Vigil's greatest strength. "We have endured," the Klyvarians said, their voice carrying the weight of eons. "But endurance is not enough. We must continue to grow, to learn, and to adapt. The chaos will always return, but so too will we. For we are not just the Eternal Vigil. We are the guardians of the galaxy's future, and we will not falter." The assembly erupted into applause, a sound that echoed through the chamber and beyond, a testament to the Vigil's enduring spirit. The galaxy listened, and for the first time in eons it felt not just hope but certainty. The vigil had endured, and so too would they. The applause faded, leaving a profound silence in its wake. The Klyvarian representatives stepped back, their words lingering in the air like the afterglow of a supernova. The assembly, now united in purpose, began to disperse, each representative carrying with them the weight of the vigil's renewed mission. The galaxy, though still scarred, was alive with possibility. The vigil had not only survived the storm, it had emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. But as the cycles turned and the vigil's influence spread, a quiet unease began to stir in the hearts of its members. The Klyvarians, ever watchful, were the first to notice it. Their sensors, attuned to the faintest disturbances in the cosmic fabric, detected something, an anomaly, subtle but persistent. It was not a threat, not yet, but it was there, lurking, in the shadows, waiting. The anomaly defied explanation. It was not a fleet, nor a weapon, nor a natural phenomenon. It was a presence, ancient and unknowable, stirring at the edges of the galaxy. The Klyvarians studied it for cycles, their analysts poring over data, their scouts venturing into the void to gather more information. But the more they learned, the less they understood. The anomaly was not bound by the laws of physics, nor by the patterns of history. It was something entirely new. When the Klyvarians finally brought their findings to the Vigil's leaders, the reaction was one of cautious curiosity. The Zephyrians, ever eager for action, proposed sending a fleet to investigate. The Lithans, more cautious, urged restraint. "We do not know what we are dealing with," they said. "To act without understanding is to risk everything." The Klyvarian representative, as always, offered a measured perspective. "We cannot ignore this," they said, "but we must approach it with care. This anomaly is unlike anything we have encountered before. It may be a threat or it may be an opportunity, but it is not something we can afford to overlook." The Vigil's leaders agreed. A small expedition was assembled, a diverse group of scientists, scouts, and diplomats, led by the Klyvarians. Their mission was not to confront the anomaly, but to understand it. They would observe, analyze, and, if possible, communicate. It was a task that required not just strength, but wisdom, a task for which the Vigil, with its newfound unity, was uniquely suited. The expedition ventured into the void, their ships cutting through the darkness like needles through fabric. As they approached the anomaly, the Klyvarian sensors began to pick up strange readings, fluctuations in space-time, echoes of energy that defied explanation. The closer they got, the more they realized how little they knew. The anomaly was not a thing but a place, a region of space where the rules of reality seemed to bend and warp. At the heart of the anomaly, they found it, a structure, vast and ancient, its surface covered in intricate patterns that seemed to shift and change as they watched. It was not a ship, nor a station, nor anything they could name. It was simply there, a monument to something beyond their understanding. The Klyvarians, their senses heightened by the strange energy of the anomaly, were the first to sense it, a presence, vast and ancient, watching them from within the structure. It was not hostile, but neither was it welcoming. It was simply aware, its gaze piercing through the void like a beam of light. The expedition's leader, a Klyvarian scientist, stepped forward. "We mean you no harm," they said, their voice calm but firm. "We seek only to understand." For a moment, there was silence. Then the presence spoke, not in words, but in images, emotions, and sensations that flooded the minds of the expedition members. It showed them the history of the galaxy, not as a linear progression, but as a tapestry of interconnected events. It showed them the rise and fall of civilizations, the birth and death of stars, the endless cycle of creation and destruction. And it showed them the Vigil, not as a guardian, but as a thread in the fabric of the cosmos, a thread that had the potential to shape the future. The Presence's message was clear. The galaxy was at a crossroads. The Vigil, with its unity and foresight, had the power to guide it toward a new era of peace and prosperity. But it would not be easy. The chaos they had fought against was not gone, merely transformed. The anomaly was a reminder that the universe was vast and unknowable, and that there were forces at work beyond their comprehension. The expedition returned to the Vigil, their minds filled with the Presence's message. They shared what they had learned not just with the Vigil's leaders, but with the galaxy as a whole. The anomaly, they explained, was not a threat, but a challenge, a call to action for all who called the galaxy home. The Vigil, now more united than ever, accepted the challenge. They knew that the road ahead would be difficult, that there would be new threats and new trials to face, but they also knew that they were not alone. The galaxy, with all its diversity and complexity, was their greatest strength, and as long as they stood together, they could face whatever the future held. In the heart of the rebuilt central hub, the Klyvarian representative stood once more before the assembly. "We have endured," they said, their voice carrying the weight of eons. "But our journey is far from over. The anomaly has shown us that the galaxy is more vast and mysterious than we ever imagined, but it has also shown us that we are capable of greatness. Together we can shape the future, together we can endure." The assembly erupted into applause, a sound that echoed through the chamber and beyond, a testament to the Vigil's enduring spirit. The galaxy listened, and for the first time in eons, it felt not just hope, but certainty. The Vigil had endured, and so too would they. And as the stars burned brightly in the void, the Vigil stood watch, a beacon of unity and resilience in a universe filled with chaos and wonder. The story of the Eternal Vigil was far from over. It was only just beginning.